podcast starts.
Listeners, welcome. If this is your first time listening to the show, and if you've heard us before, welcome back. For the last time this series, this is the final, or the finale, of the first series, of hopefully many series of And Now the Podcast Starts. Thanks for sticking with us if you've done so throughout the first series. This is a podcast that talks about horror in film, TV, other media, other items which we think of as adjacent to horror, and sometimes other things from our lives which we'd like to talk about just because that's who we are. Our discussions aim to be fun, intelligent, and hopefully useful if your interest in horror text comes from a creative or an academic perspective. But be warned, we do tend to swear occasionally, and if it's anything less offensive than the C word, it won't get bleeped. So we are probably not safe for your work. In this episode, we're going to be just talking, as we did last week, about everything we've discussed and encountered over the last year or so of making a weekly podcast about horror and random associated subjects. I am your host, CD Velasquez, but you can call me Dan. As always, I'm in Greater Manchester, and I have the great pleasure of being joined by the three people who've done more than most to keep me going through this nightmare of a year. Firstly, we have
Kirsty in Shropshire.
Welcome, Kirsty. And then
Ian Winterton in Cheshire.
And last but certainly never least, and possibly most recently published,
Stella in Manchester. Yay, I am recently published. You know, I said last week that the book was out, didn't I? And it was available to buy.
Yes.
But this week, this morning, I got my copy. So that's nice to actually see it be real.
Wow.
And it took me a couple of hours this morning to actually get brave enough to read my chapter, because I was like, oh Christ, what if there's mistakes in it? I was like, oh,
too late now.
Yeah, but I read through it and there isn't. So yeah, it's go and buy it with my blessing without going, oh God, she can't write.
Fantastic. That's global TV horror. Correct me if I've got the editors wrong, please, Stella. Is it Stacey Abbott and Lorna Jowett?
That's the one.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Is it mostly focusing on Walking Dead, or is it
just
more
me?
broader than
Just
that?
me on The Walking Dead. So
That's what I mean. Yeah, your chapter.
Yeah, obviously. Then other things in there. We've got Iranian vampires, British horror ghosts. We've got Wolf Creek, French horror, some Brazilian folklore horror, the subtle gore of The Returned, children's horror with Goosebumps. My chapter, which is fabulous, Nordic Twilight type horror, Castlevania, and some Japanese stuff at the end. So yeah, it's all
Cool.
good.
Ooh.
Excellent.
How brilliant. Yeah. Ian or Kirsty, have you got any exciting news this week with which to steal Stella's thunder?
Damn you.
No. Absolutely not. Although I convinced our kind of manager of learning centre to buy a copy, so it should be waiting up for me on my desk.
Yeah, that's cool.
When I get
Next
back
time
to work.
when
in
we
a couple
meet
of
in
weeks.
person, I'll sign it for you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I couldn't even get through that.
I don't want to. I wouldn't want to steal Stella's thunder anyway, but actually, I have news so amazing, but I would be breaking the embargo if I was to.
Well, that's wonderful.
Oh, so you can't tell us.
There's that, yeah, but also like you were denying us a clang. I feel.
No, it's not really a clang.
Do you need to pick them all up off the floor from previous weeks, because it is littered? Type it in the chat, and then everyone can listen to us go, ooh.
Yes, I'm sure the three of us can guess. Sadly, listeners, we won't be able to put you a link in the show notes to nothing. So we'll just have to leave you wondering. But I'm sure that
it's connected to Cutaway. It's connected to Cutaway Comics, so you can put a link to their website.
Okay, great.
I can't tell you.
Right. Nice. Well, we tag them on Twitter every week, so we shall do that. And listeners, just watch out for the inevitable news with Ian's name attached to it that will emerge soon. I've got no news. I'm just very much enjoying having a week off work because it's Easter.
Yay!
And
you should tell the listeners about your hand.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I
Gonna come up.
I have just had a horrific experience, which is that last night, after doing it successfully for about 300 times, I somehow poured hot water out of a kettle wrong, and while trying to make up my mum's hot water bottle for the night, I poured boiling hot water on my hand, and therefore have been lying awake in agony, unable to sleep for the last about 30 hours. But I have discovered the utility of keeping your cold packing from food deliveries, so that you can then wrap it round your hand to provide relief. And I've had a pack of cool gel in my hand for all that time, and that's the only thing that has got me through. Because basically, it's really quite weird. It's sort of okay, but then you take the cold thing away, and within about 30 seconds, it's like, ah! So,
I once splashed hot fat I put too much fat into a frying pan to make some sausages, and I went to do that thing like a proper chef where you move it, and I splashed a load of boiling hot fat onto my hand, and the biggest blister across like 3 knuckles.
Dear.
That hurt.
Ouch.
Made for some good photos, but
I mean, I can empathise. This week, I got a tiny little burn from my straighteners on my took my finger.
And then to bring it,
that annoyed me for I don't know
I think
2
that's
hours.
comparable, Kirsty. We have a sisterhood going on here.
I
Nice one.
once
Thank you very
burnt my
much.
wrist on the inside of the oven, getting something out of the oven, and I touched the side of the oven with my wrist, and it was scarred for ages, but now it's covered with a tattoo, so it doesn't matter.
this scar here, tiger shark.
That took a while.
Anyway, before we
You all know me, know how I earn a living.
yes, we do, Dan.
I do impressions of Robert Shaw, not very good ones. I'm in demand in very strange children's parties. Okay, so I've got a list of basically a couple of days ago, before I had my horrific hand burning incident, I was able to just sit down and look back over all the episodes we'd done over the last year and just wrote down things that occurred to me. You all mentioned things last week that had stuck with you after we'd gone through the kind of whole series. I didn't really say anything major because of work last week. I hadn't had time to gather any thoughts, and I could only remember the most recent stuff, so I mainly just went on about Survivors, which I will do again, but not now. I don't really need any encouragement. The first thing I want to mention, though, is... Well, actually, this is going to introduce a theme to this episode. So, listeners, obviously you'll know this if you've heard the show before. We normally have a topic, and then at the end, throw in a few recommendations for the coming week. I didn't think that was really appropriate, given that, it's not going to be a coming week. It's going to be a coming 3 months or so before you get to hear any of this again. So, I thought I will gather recommendations, and one of them also connects us back to a very early episode that we recorded. It's on all 4 at the moment, and for the next 2 weeks you can find Anna Biller's rather wonderful 2016 film The Love Witch, which I've only seen because Kirsty recommended that I watch it, and we talked about it on an early episode of the show we did about female horror creators. And I was just randomly looking on all 4 to see what films that are on there, and I was so pleased. And I checked the date, so it's going to be up there for 2 weeks from when I looked at it on Tuesday. So if you're listening to this, it will be there until a week from Tuesday. But it's such basically, as you all know. And Kirsty knows especially, I'm kind of immersed in sort of 50s and 60s colour horror movies. And especially recently I've kind of been revisiting some. And I want to rewatch The Love Witch because the use of design and style in that film, although Annabella claims it was not at all her intention to kind of recall earlier periods of filmmaking, except maybe Douglas Sirk melodramas, but not earlier kind of horror. That's fair, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'd like to kind of watch it again because I do think that that it has resonances with that. It has Samantha Robinson as a kind of ambiguous. Is it New England? It's set in New England in a vague.
I mean, it's very sunny for New England.
Oh, okay.
If it is New England.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's a stylish kind of thing, isn't it? And yeah, I didn't realise it was on All 4, so I'm delighted to hear that, because I might well just go and kind of watch it again and revel in its beauty. I mean, just the use of colour is amazing in that film. Just beautiful.
Absolutely.
Just
Although, Stella, Kirsty, just thinking then, I know that, well, you looked kind of dubiously at me when I said that, the film isn't trying to hark back to earlier styles of filmmaking. Am I wrong that Annabella, the director, has said that? She's when people have challenged her and said, "Oh, are you doing this? You're doing that?" She's gone, "No, I was just making my own thing."
I wasn't aware of that, but I mean, I think certainly it would seem sort of. I'm slightly incredulous at the idea that she wasn't, kind of in some way sort of pastiching, kind of 70s films. Maybe not horror specifically or intentionally, but it's got a very clear aesthetic and
the acting style is very specific. I think it was in Mark Kermode's review of the film. He said that either he or someone had challenged her about that, and she just said, "No, I didn't say anything like that with the actors. It just happened." I mean, she may have been lying. She may have been having fun. Who knows? But it's got a very kind of... the whole thing is kind of very archly charming, and the performances have this kind of sort of deliberately stilted, slightly heightened 70s style. I think the thing that makes me think that's not exactly what she was going for is that the performances are more than that as well. They're all kind of more heightened than even what you would get, I think. And there's a certain amount of, there's a lot of stuff about male-female relationships in it, and the men who are kind of the love interests in the movie have a particular style of acting performance which seems to comment on the gender relationships. So, but basically it just all works so wonderfully well. And if you remember when we recorded our podcast about it, because we weren't just talking about that film, we were talking about 3 other films as well, I left The Love Witch Still Last, and I had to record. I just ran out of time, and I had to record the podcast without seeing the last 10 minutes of The Love Witch. So I really just like to sit down and watch the whole thing through in one go rather than broken up, because it does have a kind of hypnotic style. Stella and Ian, are either of you familiar with The Love Witch at all?
No.
No, I've just while you've been talking, I've just been googling it and looking at the trailer, and it does look kind of stylized and fun.
Yeah.
And like has it got a little bit of sort of, I don't know, like Bewitched and things going on?
Yeah. But I was just actually, as you were talking before, Dan, I don't know why we didn't make the connection before, but it feels, kind of a bit Garth Marenghi in places.
Well, exactly. Well. Yeah. I mean, maybe that was what she was resisting. The idea that she kind of made it deliberately bad or something, which
and I think actually as well the other connection that I think when we recorded it, because it was it the first thing that you and I recorded, Dan?
Yes, I think it was.
So
I think so it was before the official kind of beginning of all
before
of this,
the launch,
before the apocalypse. So I think at that point I hadn't seen, which is, again, reflecting on last week's conversation, I thought, one of the great things for me about doing this is doing the whole Miss Classics things, and in particular getting to see Suspiria. And so I, kind of now thinking about the Love Witch, I can see actually, kind of, particularly the use of colour, how that kind of, is very clearly connected to Suspiria.
Sure, it'd be good to revisit it with that in mind, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we said this last week, but just watching films, either rewatching them or being prompted to watch films I probably should have watched.
Yeah.
It's been good, or films I just, But yeah, so The Exorcist 3 was probably something I would have gone and touched.
Same.
Until this podcast. And even though it's not like my favourite movie of all time, I'm still glad I've watched the whole thing. So I can at least go, I have now seen it.
Yeah, that's one of those films where I recognised loads of the imagery from it, because it's been talked about in many, many things, and it was useful and good to have actually seen it as a whole piece rather than just knowing that bit or that bit or that bit. It's I mean, one of my recommendations is probably, have I mentioned the Cosmic Shambles Network? Robin Ince's.
No.
It's to access most of it, you have to be a Patreon, but it's £5 a month for the lowest tier, which is doing me, and it has some wonderful, like hour-long. The Uncanny Hour is one of the main ones, and anyone who likes our podcast will really like that. It even has a whole hour on Pender's Fen, and it has the one that's coming up. I think it's out on the same day as our podcast. Is on Exorcist 3, and I've even had a brief chat with Robin Ince on Twitter because I mentioned he was
Number one.
I don't know. I mentioned he was doing it, and I said, "Oh, you have a podcast on it." And he's of the opinion that with Mark Commode that Exorcist 3 is a masterpiece. And I don't agree, but I imagine a program on it where he's interviewing lots of people will be interesting and well worth.
I'll put that link in the show notes, by the way, to Cosmic Shambles.
Yeah. You get a lot of Brian Cox,
of course,
sort of stuff as well, and loads of physicists, and just loads of really interesting left field stuff. But people who like our podcast will especially like the Uncanny Hour, because it's got, I think it's 3 hours on John Carpenter movies.
Great.
Wow.
3 separate programs.
Makes me happy.
On the so that alone is worth £5 just to get, and Alan Moore
Clang.
is there.
You have met Alan Moore, right, Ian?
I
think we should just try and get as many.
Him. I was just saying.
No, we should try and get as many clangs in though as we can. I think it's our finale.
We're going to go for an all-time clang record.
Has anyone ever counted them?
I am Clang. Who I've never met. I am Clang.
Well, but, speaking of John Carpenter, on Saturday, or was it Sunday? I don't know. One of the days over the weekend. Me and Owen watched.
It was Saturday or Sunday then.
Probably. Me and Owen watched They Live. Because he'd not seen it. And he chose it by himself, which was new. But yeah, he'd not seen it. But again, like I said, it was one of those films where he recognised loads of the bits from it. So, that's what that meme's from. Or that's where, that long brawling alleyways from.
Yeah.
And he was having that same thing that I was having watching Exorcist 3 of like, oh, I know that bit, or I've seen that bit, or I've seen that being spoofed or parodied in various other places.
That's one I'd like to rewatch.
It's on Netflix now.
I watched that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Because I watched that. I watched that at 18, and now I look back and go, I liked it at 18, but now I wonder if it's horrible adolescent
His mullet
bullshit.
is fabulous. If you're just going to watch it for anything, and no matter what he goes through, and despite the fact that he's basically living on the streets for a number of days, it's still clean and glossy and shiny and just perfect.
That's true.
Well, that's true. But is the sort of social commentary, because I remember it. I remember going, yeah, man.
It's the social commentary.
Money is your god, yeah.
It's like being hit over the head with social commentary.
And now it makes you feel like. Now I imagine I will probably go.
I don't think so, because it's quite a relaxed film, though. There's like huge sequences in it where nothing happens.
Yeah, he's just strolling around.
Yeah, I would definitely want to rewatch it again, but sometimes when I think about it, I think this is also like watching David Icke give a speech.
Well, no, it is. Alex Jones has gone on record saying he thinks that They Live is basically a documentary. And there's an interview. There used to be an interview on YouTube where he's talking to Roddy Piper, saying that movie you were in, that was basically true, wasn't it? And Roddy Piper's going, yeah. Roddy Piper might have been taking the mickey. I don't know. That interview's not online anymore, as far as I can tell. That's definitely a mark against it, but it's so clearly a satire. It's so clearly a fable. You know, I don't think it's not meant to be taken like that. That's not the point.
No, that's why I'd like to rewatch it with my nearly 50-year-old brain, because some things you see, some things you think are good when you're 18, 19, you were kind of wrong, and other times, like we talked about with Dracula, other things you just completely weren't ready for. And I wonder if I can sort of, the 49-year-old me can still like that movie, because it's all about the tone of it. So I'd like to see. Maybe that's something we can do in 3 months' time.
Yeah, I'd like to know your opinion on that.
Revisit They Live, because it might just be, oh my god, my 19-year-old liked this because it's an awful conspiracy theory wankfest, or is it actually tonally they get away with it because he's taking the piss, kind of thing. So that's what I'd like to see when I watch the movie.
Well, I'd like to have that conversation. I enjoyed it when rewatching it on the big screen recently. Before we move on from that, then, The Exorcist 3 actually is something I wanted to mention, because of our episode the other week, I decided I had to buy the DVD and see the director's cut of Exorcist 3, which is like reconstructed from barely surviving VHS remnants of the cut sequences. And although I haven't watched all the Blu-ray yet, and there's like a really big, like 3-hour long making of, which I'd be fascinated to see, I have watched the director's cut, and I have to report, it's like it's just not that very. It's not very different. It's like there's a few extra minutes, and Jason Miller's not in it, and the whole exorcism bit at the end isn't in it, and Nicole Williamson's not in it. But apart from that, there's nothing much different. Like I remember when we watched it, I thought, the whole opening sequence, which is inexplicable supernatural wind blows into a church and the statue of Jesus' eyes open and pages of Bible fly around. I thought, that's got nothing to do with the rest of the film. That's clearly a whole chunk that the studio looked at whatever it was and said, no, this is an Exorcist film. Put some religious, scary stuff at the beginning. And that's what it looked like to me. I mean, it doesn't have any of the actors in it. But no, apparently that was William Peter Blatty's original preferred opening. The only difference to the released version was that he wanted the credit sequence to be in black and white. That's it. So they've just made it black and white.
The people who said, oh, you don't like Exorcist 3, do you? Well, that's because you haven't seen the director's cut. And then I've had it described to me. And I'm like, no, the problems I have with Exorcist 3 are still there.
It doesn't matter if you had bits in.
I don't like that poor priest who we watched in Exorcist 1 is now being a reanimated zombie. all you've done is make him not acted by two people.
Yeah.
Can I use this as a segue into a recommendation? So this connects to what exorcisms generally, and to one of our previous episodes, which is Wellington Paranormal.
All right.
Which is now available in the UK. Finally, I think 3 seasons.
Where is it?
It's it's on Sky Comedy.
On Now TV.
TV. Yeah, so in the last week. So the first episode is all about a kind of demonic possession and exorcism.
Right.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And I'm delighted to report that it is just New
Is
Zealand
it everything that we wanted?
Yeah. Fantastic, because that was a big note on my list, was without this podcast, I would not have had the amazing epiphany of what we do in the shadows. And I know that there are some people who because of listening to our podcast, have discovered what we do in the shadows and fallen in love with it.
Hey.
So
People listen to us.
That's just great. And essentially, Wellington who knew? Essentially, Wellington Paranormal makes me go like, oh yes, there's more what we do in the shadow stuff that I've not seen. Great.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, it's based on it's following the two police officer characters from the film into they're kind of, it's a sort of kind of cops style kind of mockumentary as they are kind of dealing with paranormal stuff around Wellington.
That's my
New
Weekend
Zealand.
sorted.
So it was absolutely delightful.
I read about it the other day. I don't know what it was on, but I it was just in something, and I was like, I really need to see that. I really want to see that. And then there we go. You've delivered.
There we go.
Yes.
So there you are. So
Awesome. And just final thing I'll mention about Exorcist 3, if anyone's not seen the director's cut but likes the film and might have been thinking about buying it, I will say that if you're like me and you thought the best thing in the whole movie was the comedy bits with Ed Flanders and George C. Scott near the start, in the director's cut you do get a few extra minutes of that.
All right.
And that is worth seeing, but the film would be much better if it was basically entirely that and nothing else. I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, those two on a paranormal escapade. That would have been better.
That would be great. So.
Yeah, no, I still want to read I Am Legion as well, or Legion rather, and
well, as I say, it's a long time since I read it, but I don't remember having the problems with it narratively that the film does. It seemed quite satisfying. So
I think it's because they're trying to crowbar it into carrying on from The Exorcist.
Yeah, definitely.
It didn't need to do. Mm-hmm. Sometimes creators do that; they can't help themselves but go. It's like they're seduced by their own success. They go, this is the thing that's made me really famous, and Douglas Adams was guilty of that. It's like, stop writing Hitchhiker's books because you're making them worse and worse. You're watering it down. And
I disagree. I think they get better, but anyway, that's a whole different podcast.
But I don't think The Exorcist is not a movie that says I need a sequel. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
And
you should probably have realised that.
Oh yeah,
and just made Legion.
I was quite intrigued to realise when I rewatched it that there's an actor in it called Don Gordon, and the only other film that I know of him being in is The Omen 3. So it's like he said to his agent, "I only want to do movies about Satan, okay, that are part 3 in the series, no others." And his agent went, well, you're only going to work twice in the decade.
It's to mock the Trinity.
So maybe
it's essential.
Maybe that's the point he was making.
Very well.
To move on to my next point, Stella, ever since we did your episode, which was brilliant, your 2-part kind of dissection of American serialized horror, I felt guilty because of watching the wrong series of American Horror Story. And although I've not got Netflix anymore, so I can't say that I am watching a different one, I do intend to do that at some point. And I will say this, when we did True Blood, which I just loved discussing, and I did watch all of season 2 before my Now TV thing ran out, so that was great fun. And I did find myself being grateful. Imagine that I'd seen American Horror Story Roanoke, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to recognise Adina Porter, who plays the name's gone now. The mother of Suki's friend in the bar.
Oh, Tara.
Tara's mum.
Yeah.
She's one of the talking heads in American Horror Story Roanoke. So she's
great. She's in American Horror Story Cult as well. She comes back in Cult, and she comes back in Apocalypse as well, the actress.
What's the general rundown of American Horror Story? Because I've only watched the first 2. And I do like them.
So it's anthology.
I'm not abandoned it.
The first one
is
Murder House. The second one is The Insane Asylum. The third one is The Coven. The fourth one is like a circus freak show in the 1950s. Sixth one is Hotel with Lady Gaga, and that one is spectacular to look at. It's essentially based on H.H. Holmes, the serial killer, and the Hotel Cecil in downtown LA. And then we've got Roanoke, which is kind of the story within a story, found footage situation. Then there's Cult, which is the only one that has no paranormal stuff in it. It's just based about cults, as the name suggests. And then there was Apocalypse, so that brings back the witches from season 3 Coven and puts them at war with a load of warlocks for the end of the world, which is why it's called Apocalypse. And then there's 1984, which is the last one that they made, which is a slasher set in the 1980s, and it's got Richard Ramirez back again, but he is actually cavorting with the devil as he wished he was, the little prick, but he wasn't. But he is actually doing some supernatural shit, and that's quite good. And they've just released the first bit of teaser art for the next one, and it's called American Horror Story Double Feature. So, I'm hoping it's going to be like Grindhouse type situation. That's what I'm kind of rubbing my knees with glee about.
Oh,
so do you think that'll be like kind of 2 stories, half first?
I don't know. I'm just so excited.
That would be cool.
Or maybe each episode is 2 halves.
Don't know what he's going to do. Maybe that's what they've had to do because maybe COVID has driven them to do something like that. But all we've had now is just AHS 10 double feature, and the crowd went wild.
COVID has not been kind to Walking Dead so far.
I've still not watched any of it because I'm still busy writing other TV shows.
I won't spoil them, but if I guess if the scripts were good and everything, then I wouldn't be focusing on the fact that so this one's set in a cattle truck, that one was set with 2 people in a cellar, and I've just watched two of the most boring Walking Dead episodes in a row.
That's a shame, because I thought they really pulled it back with Series 9, because Series
I really
7 and 8 were dodgy, but I thought 9 was great again.
Yeah, I don't know why they've sort of added these extra hours in COVID regulations, and I don't know. But I've not watched the finale yet, which I've heard is all right. So.
Exciting
times.
It's all right. 3 stars.
Oh, gee.
Yes. No.
Also arising from your TV, US TV horror episode, Stella, was obviously I wouldn't have watched The Strain. I am now addicted to The Strain.
It's good fun, isn't it?
First series. Yeah, it's great. I have had this weird disconnect. There's always going to be something that throws you out, and that's for different people it will be some strange idiosyncratic different thing, and for me it's the fact that I watched the first episode of the second series really looking forward to getting into it, but the fact that they'd recast the actor playing is he called F, the
son.
main character, his son. Yeah, they recast him, and it's not that the new guy was bad or anything, but the actor who played his son in the first series actually looked like his relative.
Yeah, and he's not grown up that fast. I know kids have growth spurts, but not that much.
Yeah, so it's like that kind of threw me a bit, but basically I loved it. I was afraid throughout the first series because it was kind of very slowly building up, and I kept worrying that it would have what I call the lurch, where they just decide, no, we've got to get to the action faster. And that was one of the problems which Fear the Walking Dead, the first season, had for me. Is that everything built up really great for the first 4 episodes, and then it was like 2 weeks later or something, and they just jumped far further in. And I'd like to have seen that stuff.
Generally, I love Fear the Walking Dead, but I did feel like that was a misstep.
I'd like to watch more of it because I hear great things about it from you guys. So
definitely worth watching.
So basically every week I'm at the moment planning to watch an episode of Hannibal and an episode of The Stray.
I was about to say Hannibal's one of my big recent discoveries that this podcast is responsible for.
Brilliant. Kirsty's just doing a heart sign.
That's very tasty. I now know how to cook that heart. Several different ways.
It's not for vegans,
but
is it?
No, I've still got season 3 sort of lined up and ready to be a thing I start watching. But I generally didn't want to just plough in and do it all in one go.
Well, I think
No, you have to say. You have to.
I think I said it last week.
It'll probably end up dropping off bloody Prime now, won't it?
After this chapter, I'm in the middle of writing from the book now. The next chapter is about Hannibal and NBC's Dracula, so I'll have to watch it all then.
Okay. Well, if you need emotional support through season
Will
2
do.
particularly,
Will do.
and there, you can reach out and I'll, virtually hold your hand.
Yeah, season two was excellent.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. Now I'm loving going back to it, and just it's great to.
That cuddly. I love that cuddly bear guy. But yeah.
I haven't got that far yet.
Yeah, it's alright.
You'll know him when you see him.
Right.
Yeah. Like a sort of Gentle Ben. It's like watching Gentle Ben. But anyway.
No, it's perfect. And just while we're talking about stuff on Amazon Prime, I'm hoping that Hannibal will hang around for a while because it only arrived in January.
Yeah, better have do, otherwise I'm knackered.
Yeah.
One of my other recommendations for Amazon Prime is the fact that the entirety of The Handmaid's Tale is on there now. And I haven't watched... I haven't watched, I think, most of the third series, but the first two... I mean, it's a clear example of the kind of border of the horror genre, because it's not intended to be that at all, but it is possibly the most terrifying thing I've seen on TV for years. And actually, in early January this year, when the Capitol was stormed, I kept having flashbacks to that bit of narration in one of the early episodes where she says, when they slaughtered Congress, we did nothing, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny, my mother-in-law is a big Margaret Atwood fan, and when that was happening, it was because literally the first thing I texted her was like, "My God, have you seen what's happening in Washington? It's like the beginning of The Handmaid's Tale."
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to Margaret Atwood today on this isn't horror related, but no, just on a podcast. Samira, this isn't a horror-related thing, but I'd recommend Samira Ahmed's podcast. It's brilliant. But yeah, I was listening to her. I was listening to her interviewing Margaret Atwood. And obviously a lot of it was to do with The Handmaid's Tale and just the sort of the atmosphere of the 80s that kind of led into The Handmaid's Tale. And obviously, it's not that she's psychic or anything; it's that vile underbelly has been in America. since the beginning, almost the religious side that's wanted to create a theocracy, because that's why they went to the New World. It's kind of is ever present as part of America. wrestling with the other side of it. Handmaid's Tale, the third season, I wasn't quite so enamored of as the first two.
Well, no, that's why I haven't watched all of it. I think it just didn't grip me in the same way.
The kind of trailer for the new series is what's now out, and I just remember I've seen kind of headlines that say this looks like it's gone full horror now. So that's gonna be interesting. And also, one of the things I wanted to kind of bring into discussion this week, is because this is gonna really date this discussion, but only to a very specific group of people, is whether or not we feel that horror films can be set in space.
Oh, God,
I saw that.
Do not name the reporter, because she's obviously just tried to make herself famous. She's a Guardian writer.
Is it the same one that talked about Get Out and elevated horror? That also got on my wick as well. Anyway.
I don't know. She's not one I'd heard of before.
Oh, it's female. No, it's a different one then. But it's still the Guardian talking absolute bollocks about horror. But horror can't be set in space. Did you see the best Twitter reply, which was, Earth is in space?
I replied with the most horrific
wonderful
alien gif I could find, which was the chestburster scene.
Well,
when she had a poll saying, "Please, can horror be set in space?" Yes.
It's like Event Horizon.
And if yes, give reasons. And I just put yes, and then reason, and then it's a really horrific gif.
Utter nonsense.
It's just full-on graphic chestburster, and then what's the name? Sprayed with pig's blood and screaming.
Nice.
Because in space, no one can hear you scream. It's as simple as that. It doesn't really need much more explanation. Blimey. How old is this person? 17.
I just wonder if she's genuinely a moron or if she just knows here's a good place to make loads of people know.
Loads of traffic.
My name now.
But she was then complaining about, kind of film Twitter getting all touchy about it. It's like,
you just said something really fucking stupid.
and you write the culture part.
Yeah, the culture part of a newspaper. Yeah, the whole thing just was like.
But, but yeah. But the Guardian's been a mess of hot takes this week. Was it yesterday? The whole kind of our female directors getting female auteurs getting trapped by franchises. It's this again.
Was it the person who wrote that? The person who was on about elevated horror? Was it Steve Rose?
Possibly.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes, Steve somebody.
He was the one that was sort of saying that horror can only be should only be allowed to be talked about with any sort of reasonable admiration when it's elevated, like Get Out.
Oh, okay.
Shut up. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm saying a lot. No, it's funny you talk about elevated horror. I missed there was a Zoom thing, but there was a book launch for a kind of a book called Post Horror on elevated horror and kind of cultural appreciation. And looking at things like kind of Hereditary and Get Out. And
my hot take is that Get Out wasn't as good as everyone said it was.
I love Get Out.
I love Get Out.
Right.
It's my favourite. It's my favourite horror film of the last 5 years.
Do you know what? It was the. Maybe we should do a whole podcast on this because I did like loads of it, but then I didn't get the race thing. Why these white supremacists? And I know there was something else going on as well with the white people want to appropriate cool blackness. It wasn't coming out like that. It was coming out like these were weird plantation people, and it's like they plonked that bit in.
Well, it was just a zombie movie, an old school zombie movie.
Yeah.
Having seen it a couple of times, though, race relation stuff is just baked into it all the way through, and there are so many little details which just speak to that. Even very near the beginning. I mean, the whole thing is based on an interracial relationship where the boyfriend is worried about meeting his girlfriend's white parents. So that is kind of in.
I liked all that, but then I did not believe that the bad guys would do what they did.
Yeah, I don't. It's not a sort of straightforward, kind of white supremacy. I think it's all.
No. I get there was all that sort of it's liberal white people being all cool and then wanting to appropriate the coolness.
I don't think it's just about coolness though. I think that's oversimplifying it because I think it's about ownership of the male body and being able to do with it what you please. So it's not necessarily just about trying to, speak jive or whatever. It's about ownership of these bodies and removing their humanity so that you can play with them as you wish as your toys. So that's all connected in there. So I don't know. Watch it again, then come back to us.
Maybe we should do a whole one. But it just seems to. I have only watched it once, but I did buy it, and I did love loads of things about it.
I mean, there's a reason it's the only. Is it the only or possibly one of the few horror films to have won an Oscar for its script?
Yes.
And I just think it is beautifully constructed on that level, and
it's so tense.
I've seen it twice, and I'll watch it again. And it's very, very tense. It's very, very funny. It's kind of perfectly done. But I wouldn't mind watching it again and talking about it more because it's just wonderful.
Yeah, you do.
Future podcast, and I love Jordan Pelle's stuff in general. I mean, Lovecraft Country has just County. Was it Country?
Yeah.
Lovecraft Country is just amazing.
I was gutted that when I had Now TV for that month, Lovecraft Country had just vanished from it, so I couldn't watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, with me, I was very excited about the Lovecraft Country, and it corresponded with. I think we saw the first episode when we had our sort of old HGTV, and then we got a big ass 4K one, and it looked shit on that.
Oh.
And I just, well, no, it was. I think there was sort of a period of adjustment there where that show was the one that kind of I noticed it more, but I was a bit disappointed with it. I mean, there were some really standout episodes, but I just sort of felt a little bit like it was all over the place. It didn't quite know what it was doing. But there were some, like the Hippolyta episode where she, kind of ends up sort of travelling.
Yeah.
Past eons and becomes empowered. It was amazing and just bonkers. But I just didn't. It didn't. So there were kind of little moments in the series that I thought were really well done, but on the whole, I wasn't as sort of thrilled by it as I was.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to see a second season of that.
I'll watch the second season. Yeah,
I've seen it at all. Yeah.
Oh well, I'd love to see it, and hopefully we can all talk about that then. Just while we've got half an hour left, because I don't want too much of the conversation to be dominated by non-horror stuff. But as we've just had an Ian doesn't like something very much, we all think it's great thing, disagreement, I just want to pull back to a few weeks ago. We have the recurrent Ian doesn't like superhero things theme, which happened over the last few weeks. And I feel like there's just a moment when I was listening back to the one where we were, Ian, bless you, when you were slagging off the Christopher Nolan Batman films, and I kind of half-heartedly said, Batman Begins is good. But actually, what I meant to say was, Batman Begins is my favourite film of that entire decade. I'm pretty sure I can say that.
Did you not watch any films in that decade?
Woohoo! Oh, burn! And that was the decade when I went to university.
Get your cold pack on, Dan.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to say that I don't particularly rate the sequels to it, but I think it's a great movie. And a lot of the stuff that people mock about those movies, like Christian Bale's voice, are not nearly as bad in Batman Begins.
In fact, it was 16 years ago. I've just googled it. It was 16 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Well, that might be a. Let's revisit a missed classic, because I was so young then. I might have missed it. I might be completely wrong.
It's not horror, is it? But it is all about the power of fear. And I went to see it with my friend Emma, who was terrified by it and had to hide her head when the scarecrow appeared and things like that.
She doesn't listen to this then, I imagine.
Probably not. But hello, Emma, if you do, God bless you. So I just wanted to throw that in. Oh yeah, also Ian, at one point when you were on a kind of anti-superheroes rant, I know it occurred to Kirsty to say, have you seen The Boys? What do you think of The Boys? I've not seen The Boys.
But I can watch, I can watch some superheroes. I tend to prefer the less superhero-y they are. Like, I really like Gotham on TV, and I really like Daredevil on TV.
I mean, but Boys is very much kind of critique of superhero kind of branding and identity and the corporate. It's really great. We're also watching at the moment Doom Patrol on Starz Play. I keep calling this Starz
Play.
Which is
Owen watched that, and it's rare for him to be asked about a series, and he watched all of that.
Yeah. There's so much
Can't
to
get
watch.
into watching any series. Though I persuaded him to start watching Westworld, and he was sticking with that. So.
Westworld I got very bored of.
I've only seen the first series, and I thought it was great, but I didn't think there was a need to watch more.
Cheer up, Ian!
No. Absolutely loved the first series. Absolutely thought it was perfect. And then the second season, for me, just dropped. It's like it went off a cliff.
You see, I've been told the opposite by a colleague at work, saying the first season's okay, but the second season's brilliant.
Yeah, I guess everyone has different needs out of series.
Yeah. Well, I just, because I wrote a thing recently. I wrote a thing recently
on that thing
about that thing. Yeah. Westworld. I know that I am quite good.
You're
at
good at the words.
Yeah. So I watched kind of season 1 and season 2 on TV when it was sort of kind of being weekly simulcasted in the States or whatever. And then more recently, when I've kind of gone back and rewatched it, and then watched season 3, which I've sort of given up on, and properly binged it. And I do think it works much better as a binge than it does as a week by week thing. Just because I think without too many spoilers, season 2 really relies on the idea of sort of the non-linearity of it being kind of fundamental to the plot, or the understanding of a particular character.
Season 2, that is.
And if
season 1 messes around with.
But it does. I think season 2 does it in a way that it's sort of, you're not meant to kind of understand it, or at least it's not as. It's difficult to explain without completely spoiling it. But
I think find that
it makes much more sense when you binge it than.
Well, this binging idea, I think, because of the process that I'm going through with writing this book, because I've split it into, I'm going to talk about this series here and that series there and that series there. So I watch the whole thing, then I research about it, and then I write about it. And there's some of them where I think if I'd have watched this week to week, I reckon I'd have loved it. But having it all compressed into one thing, and I'm just clawing my way through it, I'm just thinking, oh Christ on a bike. Like Penny Dreadful, I think if I'd have watched that week to week, it would have been my favourite thing in the whole world. But altogether, that much poetry and standing around in gloomy rooms is a bit much. Whereas this week I've just watched all of Castle Rock, and it's just so dull and slow. But I think week to week, it would have been, because it's really beautiful to look at, I might have enjoyed it, but all compressed together. Oh, no.
I just wonder if that's just a product of being where we are in terms of, kind of modes of delivery.
Yeah, maybe.
We're still, some television is, like, kind of producers haven't quite got their handle on like how the difference between a week to week thing.
I agree.
Or a kind of binge thing.
Because they're always saying in the press, oh, we've made a 10-hour movie. We're not thinking about it as a series. We've made a 10-hour movie. So, but then you're showing it week to week. Or they're doing the opposite way around. We've made a series, or we've, it's like, where are we going with this? I mean, it's not in any way my purpose in my writing or research to say whether or not I think something's good. It's not my job to make value judgments, but to you lot, I can. And to friends, I can be like, oh my God, Castle Rock, I want to kill myself. It's too slow. Nothing is happening. Although Sissy Spacek was in the first series, and it was great to see her have an awful lot of screen time, which I was enjoying. But I think if I would, suggest if you're going to watch Castle Rock, if you're a Stephen King fan, don't watch it all at once, because I think you'll just end up bored. Not enough happens every episode.
Yeah. By the way, my friends, I think this is a moment to take a segue, because I mentioned last week that our friend Howard was not doing very well following his jab. I'm pleased to say he's much better now. And in fact,
I thought
you said that in such a scary tone, Dan.
I know. I was really worried there.
I'm really sorry.
Really, you're going to say this now?
Well, yeah. I hope that if it was serious, I would have told you earlier or before we were recording. But no, I'm just saying it now because he's been able to record a bit with me, and I'm going to insert it into this episode. So I'm creating an
So we've got a bag of death.
A bag of feeling like death. Excellent.
Yes, bit of both.
Back from the brink of death.
So we'll segue over and listen to Howard now. Hello listeners, it's time for the Bag of Death, and more excitingly still, it's time to reunite with Howard. Hello, Howard.
Hello everybody.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm well, I'm very well. No, I did, yes, I had my vaccination a week and a half ago, which I was very excited about, and a relief. And also, it was a strange feeling. I felt this kind of sense of validation because 12 months ago, when all this terrible thing started, and we became aware of this virus, and it was on the news, people were starting to die, and going to hospitals and all this, and it all seemed very dark and terrible and awful. And I remember saying to people, well, yes, it is awful now, but don't worry, one day there'll be a vaccine. Sooner or later, there'll be a vaccine, a cure, a treatment, something. And I knew that because that's how the human race works. When there's a problem, the human race finds a solution. It's always done it throughout history. And if there's a virus, they find a vaccine. It might take a while, You know, it happened earlier than I thought, but I knew they'd find one. I knew there were some very, 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 very clever people in laboratories all over the world. These scientists, they would find one. And it's not even anything particularly virtuous. It's survival. It's instinctive. That's how the human race survives. If there's a problem, you get over it. You find a way of dealing with it. And that's what we did. Well, I didn't personally, but all these, extremely clever people in their laboratories, they did. They found the vaccine. And so when I had mine, and I didn't feel a thing, actually.
Oh, great.
It was, I kind of said, is that it? When it was done. I remember feeling quite smug when I was walking away from the medical centre in Pries, which is a little village where I had it done, which has 2 shops and 4 churches. And not much. I'm walking back thinking, well, there we are. See, I said this was going to happen. I said there'd be a vaccine, and here we are. There's a vaccine, and I've had it in my arm. And I went off and bought a sandwich.
Great.
So that was, I did feel a bit rough. I did have the side effects that people said you would experience, the kind of lightheadedness and the sort of sluggishness and all that sort of. But that faded off. And now I feel fit as a fiddle, and ready for love, as the man said. And it was good. No, and all kudos. Praise, you cannot praise it highly enough. All the people working in the NHS, doctors and nurses, and all the people who are administering these vaccinations, they are heroes. People talk about heroes, and they talk about film stars or musicians or whatever, footballers, whatever. No, real heroes are the ones who work in hospitals and the ones who are saving lives and the ones who are giving out these injections. They're the people we should be admiring.
Yeah.
People should be on stamps and all this sort of thing and having awards and all that sort of thing.
Lots of them are volunteers giving their hours and their time for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I just volunteered for something. There's a market research company that wants to test people to see how prevalent the virus is. So I'm going to be sent a home testing kit. So I've got to stick that cotton bud thing up my hooter.
Oh, right.
Cake hole. And then send it off to the people so it can be analysed. Because I've never had a coronavirus test. I thought, well, let's try it. Let's help out.
Yeah, I've never had one either, actually, and that is something that I will start doing once the restrictions ease and allow us to move out beyond the house, which they will do very soon. So
things have changed. The pubs will be open next week. We can sit outside. So it's a nice day. I've got a couple of friends who live around here that I'm going to go for a drink with. So that's good. But here we are, and we are in a much better place than we were 9 months ago, 6 months ago. Science, you see. It's science. Science provides the answer, always.
Science, as Magnus Pike said on Thomas Dolby's. She blinded me with science.
He was one of those people that everybody did impressions of back in the 1970s, along with Frank Spencer and Columbo.
Right.
I was watching Sunday night at the London Palladium, and somebody came on and did an impression of Frank Spencer. And I thought, my God, this takes me back.
Right.
Because everybody did, back in the 70s and 80s, everybody did an impression of Michael Crawford as Frank Spencer. So nobody's done it for bloody years, but here's somebody doing it. This is what it was like when I was a child.
Wow.
Impressions of Frank Spencer.
Again, that's Talking Pictures TV that's on, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's awful, Sunday night at London Palladium. It's sort of like, you can understand why Variety died when you watch that programme.
Oh, dear. God.
When you watch Charlie Drake, you think, well, thank God we live
right.
in different times.
You're great at pointing out the reasons why life is better than we may sometimes think, and all the stuff that we have to be grateful for, Howard. So
yes. Some things are much better than they used to be. And here we are, and we're all a lot, and we're moving forward, and things are improving, and let's be optimistic.
Yep, slowly. Excellent. Howard, it's such a pleasure to have you back. Shall we dive into the bag of death and see what comes out?
Dive thoughts down to my soul.
So, listeners, the bag of death, as you may know, contains every English language movie that Howard, horror film, or mainly kind of horror movies that Howard and I have both seen, but maybe not seen recently. And whenever we plunge a hand into the bag of death, who knows what may be withdrawn and what we'll have to talk about. So I am now rummaging.
Rummage. Very exciting.
And I have got something. And it is The Abominable Snowman.
Oh, what, the Peter Cushing one?
Well, I haven't seen... there's only Peter Cushing one, isn't there?
Well, yeah.
Well, The Abominable Snowman is it 1957 Hammer film? It's
Yes.
It's a black and white film. It's a remake of a TV play, much like the Quatermass Experiment. It's a remake of a Nigel Neal TV play which was called The Creature, and which also starred Peter Cushing. The film version is directed by Val Guest, who did Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2, and the co-star in it is the American actor Forrest Tucker. And the screenplay is written by Nigel Neal, so it's... I haven't seen the original play, but I can assume it's fairly faithful to the original, and it's basically about an expedition in the Himalayas. It's a contemporary setting, I think, isn't it?
I think it is. I'm not. It's a long time since I've seen it. I do remember it was on a few years ago, and it's sort of it's like conflict. I suppose the point of it is this conflict between Peter Cushing's character who wants to study the creature, and this is a whole new life form, and we must sort of study it and understand it, and the Forrest Tucker character who just wants to exploit it and make money out of it.
Yeah, he wants to kill it and take the specimen back to America, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember too much. I do remember some scenes at a monastery.
Yeah, they start off in a Tibetan monastery, I think, and then move out into an expedition from there. And it has a kind of gentle menace to it. If I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but I think the music is by Wilfred Josephs, and there's just a sense of mystery. It's quite beautifully shot as well, considering it is Hammer, it is low budget. I think it's one of their best looking movies. They obviously didn't shoot main unit stuff in snowy mountains. I think it's all mountaintops recreated in studio, but I think they did send a camera unit to, I think probably Wales, to shoot kind of long shots of people going up, Mount Snowdon and places like that. So you do get these kind of epic vistas in it, and it's really nice looking.
It looked realistic, the scenes on the mountains.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to do that in studios, to make a mountain, an icy mountain, look realistic. But I think they did that pretty well. I think it looked good.
Yeah.
Hammer's production value was always pretty good. I thought it was very good, actually.
Well, considering their resources were actually very limited, and considering the sheer size, i.e. not very big, of their main studios at Bray at the time, they had to keep reusing that same kind of room and redressing it. If you look at the making of Dracula, which was only 1 year after this, most of that movie is on the one set that they had, but they just kept redressing it. And they turned it into a different halls of a castle, and they turned it into a graveyard, and they turned it into a living room and a hotel and all this stuff. So
Hammer films, to me, never look cheap. A lot of British films at the time, lower budget films, they look cheap. They've got this cramped look to them, and they look very kind of like, it's like a little bit tatty. But Hammer films never did. Even though they were made for not very much money, they always looked impressive. The sets always looked good. So they were able to make something really good out of not very much. And I think that was one of their real skills, and why those films have survived, because they look really good.
I mean, I think that's true to an extent. I think that there's the... especially in the later Hammer films, it's kind of the foregrounded special effects which kind of undo that. You've got your rubber bats and things like that, which are a bit shonky and which kind of undermine the overall opulence. But especially in the early ones, they would just there would be a grandeur to the settings and the use of colour and stuff.
I think so. That's the way it is. There is a sense of grandeur to them. There's a sense of size to them, and they look, the sets and the costumes and the props, they all look kind of fairly immaculate, and you never think, oh, I'm watching some cheap thing. It always looks very impressive, and so does The Abominable Snowman. I mean, it's interesting, why I find The Abominable Snowman interesting is it's directed by Val Guest, so it's in the same spirit, it's got the same look as the two Quatermass films.
Yeah.
In that it's black and white, it's got an American star, it's based on the Nigel Neal story. And it's like Hammer film that at that time were going through two slightly different paths. You've got the colour films based on the kind of like the classic iconic monsters and myths and everything. You've got the Draculas and Frankensteins, and they're made in colour with those really good sets and everything. But you've also got this other series of films, like the two Quatermass films, like X the Unknown and like The Abominable Snowman, which are made in black and white, and which are much more kind of eerie and shadowy and that sort of thing. Much more perhaps subtle, you know. And they all have an American star in them. And it's like that really didn't work. The colour Hammer films, the Gothic films, were so incredibly successful that the black and white films kind of sort of faded off.
Well, I think Abominable Snowman represents a partial transition between those two modes, doesn't it? Because you have got the American lead, but you've also got Cushing as the co-lead.
Yes.
And you know, it's very, he's not a supporting character. It's very much, you know, a tug of war between them as to who dominates the movie.
Oh, equal. And I think if anybody thought about this film now, they think it's a Peter Cushing film.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
star.
Yeah.
Forrest Tucker, somebody. Forrest Tucker, I remember, and you must get that name right. You know, those two initials.
Yes.
Was in a series in the 1970s, I remember, with great glee, I think it was called Ghost Hunters. And it was sort of like Ghostbusters 10 years earlier. But it was this very cheap looking, I'm digressing now, but I just remember this series, of Forrest Tucker and an actor called Larry Storch and a man in a gorilla suit.
It was not Ghost Hunters, Howard. It was actually called Ghost. It was called The Ghostbusters. The people who made the movie Ghostbusters had to pay the owners of that series for the rights to take the name.
Well, it was kind of like a very cheap American comedy. It had a laugh track, I think, so it was a comedy show. And at the beginning, Forrest Tucker was dressed like a baseball player, and Larry Storch, who's in Colombo, was the world's grumpiest driving instructor. He's like in a suit, and there's a man in a gorilla outfit. And I just remember the music. I'm Spencer, he's Tracy, I'm Kong, or kind of... And then
they're Ghostbusters, yeah.
Ghostbusters. I'm Spencer, I'm Tracy, he's Kong. Comedians, like, or comedy actors like Jim Backus, Mr. Magoo voice,
right,
would appear as sort of vampires and kind of... but it was a comedy. It was one of those things that came from my childhood, which sort of has embedded itself in my brain. I won't go away.
And in the early 80s, when the movie Ghostbusters was big, it caused a revival of interest in the TV series The Ghostbusters, and the toys came out again. So I, being 5 and not knowing what the hell was going on, I did have some toys of the Ghostbusters, which my parents bought for me, mistakenly thinking they were Ghostbusters. So I probably did have a little model of Forrest Tucker. I've never realised that until now.
What a wonderful thing to have, and I'm sure he would be thrilled to know that children all over the world are playing with little versions of him.
Yes. And
I don't know why there was a man in a gorilla suit.
No, I don't know. I can't remember any reasoning behind it.
No, I don't think there was any. It was the 1970s where there was no reasoning behind anything, really. It happened.
Although, Howard, you'd know this, Forrest Tucker as well, he is a Colombo victim, isn't he?
He's a Colombo victim. He's gets killed by Patrick O'Neill. And it's a good one as well, because his body is buried in a building, in the foundations of a building.
Oh yes, that episode is actually directed by Peter Falk, isn't it?
By Peter Falk himself, yes.
Yeah. Oh, God.
It's a good one. Not a great one, but it's a good one.
Yeah, it's from the first series, that. Sorry, listeners, this is turning into the Columbo podcast. It always will for a few seconds whenever Howard and I are talking.
The Ghostbusters is turning into the...
Well, it's the Forrest Tucker podcast, really. But just to briefly drag it back to the Abominable Snowman, I do think it's effective. Basically, the expedition to look for the Yeti, the members of the expedition start to suffer mishaps, or to go a little bit mad, or to actually die, and a mystery builds up as to whether the Yetis, who are not seen, are really stalking them. I mean, you do eventually see the Yetis, I think, but for the most part, they're unseen. And the kind of members of the expedition are arguing, is there really someone out here kind of tracking us, what's going on? Arguing about whether to go back to base or whether to carry on, that kind of thing. And it becomes a kind of paranoid, uneasy journey. And at the very end, we do have a resolution that I won't spoil, but reveals something perhaps unexpected. So I do think it's worth watching. And also, listeners, if you don't know this movie, it's quite accessible. I think Hammer Films themselves have actually put it on their own YouTube channel, and it's also available on Shudder, or it used to be. And possibly on Amazon Prime as well.
I saw it actually on BBC Two.
Right. That's when I saw it.
Like horror films shown on terrestrial channels these days, so that was...
Well, they had a little burst of horror films a few years ago where they showed The Mummy and Dracula and Curse of Frankenstein and The Abominable Snowman. I think they were all on at Christmas.
Right. I think it might have been Christmas, because I do remember. But I remember being not even BBC 4 when it was actually on BBC 2. It's a long time since actually watching these sort of films on the terrestrial channel, on the BBC. I suppose it's kind of like the idea is they are all... Is it the Abominable Snowman, or are they all the victims of their own paranoia and their own greed and their own recklessness? And that's what sort of...
Yeah.
And the Abominable Snowman, the Yeti themselves, are just kind of gentle creatures who just want to be left alone.
Yeah, and being a Nigel Neal script, the characterization is strong, the dialogue is good, and it does hold your interest. So, as a fan of early Hammer, and as a fan of anything else Nigel Neal has done, I hope that this podcast will have introduced some listeners to During Barty's Party, and if you like that, go check this out, because the writing, unlike in, the first Quatermass film, where Nigel Neal's kind of voice is kind of been diluted by other writers, this is very much him, kind of just doing what he wants to do. So I think it carries that standard.
I also thought it was interesting that the imported American star is the bad guy. Usually the fading American leading actor is usually the goodie, and the villains are always British. But in this particular film, Forrest Tucker is the baddie, and Peter Cushing is the goodie. So
again, that shows the kind of shift in Hammer's confidence. I think
in the original play it was Stanley Baker.
Yes, and I do wish that they'd retained him, not because Forrest Tucker is bad, but because I just love Stanley Baker, and the idea of... is there another film that Baker and Cushing are in together? I can't think of one. And Stanley Baker was a Hammer star a little bit later than this. He starred not in horror films, but he starred in a crime thriller called Hell is a City for them. I'll just say that again because my phone made a noise. He starred in a crime thriller called Hell is a City for them, and he also starred in a really great war movie called Yesterday's Enemy, all of which were directed by Val Guest.
There's a film called The Man Who Finally Died with Stanley Baker and Peter Cushing. It's not a horror film, despite the title. It's a spy story, but they're both in it.
Oh, great. Oh, well.
Mike Zetterman, I think, is in it. And,
wow, okay.
But I know they're both in it together.
That's one to check out.
I don't know if they're in anything else together. But Stanley Baker's in the TV play. Stanley Baker, of course, is Welsh. So in the original TV play, the villain wasn't American. He was British, but in the film. And Forrest Tucker is a good actor. Let me say, he was great in Ghostbusters.
He'd have to be.
He's good in this. He's a good actor. Usually he's to be found in westerns, but he did make a few sci-fi films.
Right. Well, there we go. I keep wanting to call it The Creature, but it is The Abominable Snowman. Hammer Films, 1957. Check it out on YouTube or Shudder or Amazon Prime if you haven't seen it. Thank you, Howard. That's the bag of death for this week.
Oh.
And we'll see you, or we'll be hearing from you again when the podcast resumes after our spring break.
After the hiatus?
Yes, which will be limited in duration, we promise.
Well, I'm buying a computer, so I might be able to join you.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, we look forward to that very much.
Future.
Thank you so much, Howard. We'll see you next time.
Yep. See ya.
Okay, what else have we got that we'd like to say in the last?
We didn't at all mention last week about the kind of fortuitousness of the beginning of this podcast. I think on the first episode that we recorded as part of the proper podcast, Dan, that you watched the Rob Zoom horror thing.
Oh yes,
skit
yeah.
You did, and then we were able to sort of track that.
Yeah.
Kind of as with the release of Host and obviously having Rob on and Gemma on.
Yeah.
And stuff. So I think kind of if you're going to pick one film that's been important to this podcast, it has to be Host.
It's crucial.
Totally.
Well, it's funny, and it speaks to how the pandemic has kind of warped time. Yeah, I think we're very lucky to have that theme. We're almost the host podcast at points, I think, and that's wonderful. And it has really made this a moment. Yeah. But it kind of it made me realise how much life has changed and become disconnected from the past, because we're talking about, I can't remember if it's on mic or not, but the other week I was talking to you all about how I'd seen Salen from Host in the Michael Fassbender Macbeth film, and Ian mentioned that she was in Doctor Who recently, and I know that I'd seen that episode, so I was like, oh, why didn't I recognise her? And it actually took me a while to realise, because Host had not been made when that episode was broadcast, It's like we've moved into a universe where everything is kind of so joyless that we're focusing on Host, and it's wonderful, and it's it's hard to imagine a universe without it to keep us going. So we've been really lucky.
Yeah, and the fact I didn't realise until we interviewed Stephen Volk how he'd been sort of instrumental accidentally in Host getting made, in that it was him talking to Jed on his podcast saying, well, I don't know what I'd do today, that's up to your generation to sort out, and that set the sort of gears whirring in Jed's head. And then the pandemic happened, and then it was, oh shit, Zoom, well that's modern.
And here we are.
Let's haunt Zoom.
Yeah.
And,
that's fantastic.
And they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pandemic has been a spur to action in many ways. For some people, it made them make a movie. For us, it made us finally make a podcast that we've been talking about doing for
150 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just need to kick up the arse.
I know. I managed to get through it all by not quite getting round to buying a microphone, and I just keep thinking, I'm going to buy a microphone, and then COVID's just going to disappear instantly, and I'll never need to touch a podcast again.
I was going to get one, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to go back to campus teaching in September.
Yeah.
So I refuse to buy any more home kit, because I'm clinging on to the hope that I'll go back to work properly.
Yeah, no, I'm still going to buy a microphone, because I'm certainly not going to drive into somewhere after we've done this. That's the thing, we kind of think, I'm not going to especially drive in to meet the four of you. Not like every week when we could just do it on the internet. Whereas before,
Oh, we are all in very different places.
well, yeah,
as well.
but, you know, like before, you went, "Oh, do you want to come on my podcast?" And it wasn't even in my head that I could do it remotely. It was like, "Oh, where are you doing it?" Oh,
Yeah, I remember.
And that was what was that? 18 months ago, 2 years ago.
2018, that, Ian. Yeah, I've just edited.
Yeah.
Well, on the last Halloween review episode that we put out, at the end of the recording, there is a bit where the door opens and Howard is interrupted speaking and goes, "Oh, hello, Ian." So that's the moment when you came in to do your very first recording.
Yeah, and it's very much, and that's the sort of tale of that's how crap it can be not being able to use the internet. Because I drove in, I had a couple of pints with you, and it was very nice seeing you, but I was also very tired. And then I drove home and drove Howard back to Shropshire, and I got a speeding ticket going at 35 miles an hour through a village. So it cost me 35 quid in a fine, and then I came home. Yeah. And now it'd be, there's no way I'm coming in just for a couple of hours to meet you.
No.
How did we even think that was normal?
But I think though is what you're missing though, Ian, is the idea that actually if we were going to meet in person, your house would be the logical place.
I suppose so.
Just in terms of distance.
Oh, it's true. It's in the middle, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is in the middle. Oh. So you probably wouldn't have to go anywhere. We just like arrive at yours.
You can
all right, party around at Ian's. Yeah.
Sit around our dining room table.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, we've just all mentioned our microphones. It's the last episode of the series, so I'm going to finally give an on-air shout-out to my two friends, both called Rick, who are responsible for the microphone I've been using. Poor Rick Redioff. He's had a thank you credit on the website all the time, and hopefully he will hear me say this. He lent me his microphone recorder, obviously before lockdown, and then I was unable to return it to him, so I've just done every episode of this podcast on it. And my other friend, Rick O'Neill, he gave me the microphone, which I've ended up giving to Kirsty.
Yes, it is in a bag, not attached to this
computer. Yes, I know
currently.
You're having problems. That's happened, but it's there, and it's been great use. I think Rick O'Neill's specific intention was here's a microphone, go make some podcasts. So it's great that we've done it. Yeah, so guys, we've got about 10 minutes left. I think we're kind of normally at the point where we traditionally go recommendations, so I think make sure that you get any recommendations in the last few minutes.
Can I take this moment to reiterate a previous recommendation, which is Tanis?
Yeah.
So podcast Tanis, 5 seasons. To be fair, the first 3 are probably the strongest. Kind of diehards. We'll see it through season 3 and 4. 4 and 5. But it's that kind of documentary serial style fiction, but is it? I mean, it is, but it very much likes to pretend that it's not. Lots of kind of occult kind of connection points with things like Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and
Aleister Crowley.
He was
Lovecraft
a figure and things like that. Yeah. And the guy who hosts it. I shall not name because it gets complicated when you start thinking about fiction and non-fiction elements of it. Has got a very lulling voice as well, so it's got a very kind of I like lulling horror.
Oh, nice. No, I know what you mean.
That's kind of quietly disturbing.
Oh, brilliant! No, that sounds completely up my street. My go-to if I can't get to sleep, I tried it last night when I had my burn hand and it bloody didn't work, but it usually does. Is to listen to M.R. James Ghost Stories read by Michael Hordern. There's one on the ash tree. There's a brilliant bit at the start of the story where, for no reason completely irrelevant, he just goes on about the kind of houses he'd like to buy and live in. He just does that for about 2 pages and then goes, but this is a digression. It's relevant, though, because the story I'm going to tell you is about a house. There's no real link. But it's just great. Sorry, that was just a digression of my own.
Meta.
For a couple of recommendations of mine, one of the wonderful things about doing this podcast for the last year was the fact that we got to experience 1 Fright Fest and 2 Grim Fests during the run. And one of the favourite films that we talked about a lot, and the people to do with it were lovely to talk to and have been friends on Twitter, is They Reach, which I was delighted to discover is now on Amazon Prime.
Oh, cool.
So people can easily watch that. So I'll put that link in there.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, listeners, obviously because we're coming to the end of the episode, it seems appropriate for me to say, so the plan is that we will come back in a few months, and during the break, we'll still be putting out bits of content, as in articles might appear on the website, that might even be the occasional kind of short bonus mini episode and things like that. We will be doing stuff behind the scenes, but we're just kind of having a break from the weekly schedule. But we will be back with more and more exciting of the same kind of stuff that we've enjoyed crafting so far. That's kind of the idea, and we'll still be on the social media and stuff like that, and tweeting madly. So anyone has any ideas for things we should do episodes about, please do get in touch.
Well, we've built up a few in this episode, haven't we? So Get Out, and what else was there?
And other things as well.
Don't worry, I'll note it down.
Dan's paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone can write in and tell us what we've just said, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And by the way, a few weeks ago, I did Stella's trick of recommending something that I haven't quite finished with yet. And we kind of noted how that can be a mistake that will come back to bite you. So I just want to acknowledge it now. So it's the podcast, the Supernatural Horror Podcast audio series, Sour Hall on Audible, which is a 6-part drama. And I kind of recommended it, but with the caveat, I haven't heard the ending yet. So I don't know for certain. The ending was quite disappointing. It's a shame because it's a really beautifully produced drama.
Yay!
It was done on location. It's binaural as well, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It uses the stereo field. So if you listen to it with headphones, it's great. And also, when I got to the end credits of it, I realised that a few people who made it were friends and acquaintances of mine. So my friend Leah Marks, who's got a wonderful podcast called The Voiceover Social, which I'll mention in the notes. It's not horror, but it's really fun and useful if you're an actor or a podcaster, or both. She was the associate producer, and her baby appeared in it, and there was an actor in it called Andonis Anthony, who I used to work with at the Oldham Coliseum. It was not, I think they recorded it on location. Basically, it felt like a very local production. They went up to farmhouses in the hills around Leeds and recorded it in last August when there was a kind of break in lockdown. So it's a really interesting production, but it does have a bit of a disappointing ending. So I just have to caveat that.
Yeah.
So we've got 1 minute, guys. Is there anything else any of you would like to throw in?
I would like to just say a big thank you to all three of you for being here and doing this over the last year, when I've probably gone 10-15% less mad than I would have done ordinarily.
I know.
So thanks for letting us do this. It's been
thank you, and thank you, Dan.
It's been a good solid thing every week to have an anchor in when everything else was just a complete mess.
Yeah.
Oh, bless you all. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for giving your time to it, and it's been a real kind of lifeline to me as well. I'm really glad that we did it, and in a way, I'm sorry to make a break in it, but we'll continue to do creative stuff, and then we'll be back, and I'm sure it will be good as well for us all to not have this weekly schedule for a little while, just to be able to go back and enjoy more of our time with our families.
Finish the
book. Yes.
That's
more of my wife.
Good luck, Stella.
Number one. Finish the book, talk to my husband, write a horror module, and I'll have all those things done by the next time we speak.
I've got
okay.
I've got several scripts and 10 issues of a comic to write.
We'll be fine.
So yeah,
totally fine. We've got this.
We've all got writing to do, and we're going to do it absolutely, because we've been inspired.
Yeah.
I think I've actually gone through all my recommendations.
Yeah.
Excellent. So hopefully that's plenty to keep people going over the next 3 months. Awesome.
Don't cry,
Well,
Luke, don't cry. You're right.
thank you, Ian. Thank you. It is quite difficult, quite emotional. It's a big moment. All right, listeners, thank you so much for keeping us company or letting us keep you company all this time during lockdown. It's been an absolute blast. We hope that you've enjoyed it. And we will be back. Thank you so much, Stella. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Ian, for your company.
Thanks, Dan.
And thank you to Howard and all of our guests who've enlivened our episodes during the run as well.
I got through the whole episode without saying.
That's good to know. It's good that you made that extra effort on the last episode.
I think let's just leave it.
And on that
Devil may
note,
care. I love that whole thing in the beginning, Dan, where you go, "This may not be safe for work," and it's a bit like, "Well, should we listen to it at work?" Just go,
do your bloody job.
People do that.
Just listen to a podcast.
To be doing work.
This cunt. Do it anyway.
Oh, God.
I know at least one person who does definitely listen to this podcast at work. So that
And now she's fired. Pete.
Well, what fun! All right, guys, thank you so much, and listeners, you'll hear from us again.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, T.D. Velasquez, Stella Gaynor, Ian Winterton, and Howard Whittaker. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.